Well, hello everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. As Aaron said, I'm Paul Dietmann. I work for Compeer Financial, which is a farm credit system cooperative that serves the upper Midwest. We were formed by a merger of AgStar, First Farm Credit, and Badgerland Financial. So I've been with the company about a little over 7 years, I guess now. I was with Badgerland Financial prior to that. I work with our Emerging Markets Loan Program, which is a loan program that's specifically designed for people who are doing things outside of traditional commodity production. So I work with a lot of organic growers and people marketing meat direct to consumers, vegetables, and things like that. Appreciate the opportunity to work with Jim Munsch on this project, and Aaron and Jody Padgham as well. And so what we're trying to do with this turning grain into dough, and I have to give credit, the title came from Anders Gerda, which it's awesome. Yeah, and Anders, of course, used to work for UW-Madison and now works for Pipeline Foods up in the Twin Cities. So I'm going to just kind of introduce this topic, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and Jim's going to get into the meat of this tool, this Excel-based tool that will help you figure out if you can make money or not in this business, and what kind of profits you can look at down the road. So I just want to share a couple of thoughts kind of as you're getting ready to dive into organic grain production. And this is based on working with organic growers for quite a few years now, and people going through the transition as well as people who've already made the transition. First recommendation I would have for people is to start the planning at least 1 year in advance of actually making the switch to organic production. You want to give yourself time to do the planning that you need to do, to go to conferences like this, to go to field days. Pick people's brains, find people that are in the industry, whether it's contacts on the supplier side, whether it's contacts on the buyer side, people like Aaron, UW Extension, Extension in your home states if you're not from Wisconsin, but also finding mentors. And I think that's a really important piece of making this transition, because it isn't like any other type of production. You can't just go down the road and talk to your neighbor who's a conventional farmer. There's a lot of things about soil health and different weed management strategies and all sorts of things that you need to learn when you get into this business. And so you don't want to jump into it too quickly. You want to make those contacts first before you get into the business. Number two, and I'm a bit biased being a lender, but I would say talk to your lender early in the process. You want to make sure that you've got your lender on board. Not every loan officer understands organic. And I think you need somebody who understands organic. And we're not the only ones who do that. I'm biased, I think we do it the best. But there are a lot of other lenders out there now that we didn't have 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there were very few lenders that understood organic production systems. And I think a lot of folks felt that it was a passing fad. I think it's clear now it's not a passing fad. This is a real trend, and it's the direction that at least part of the industry is going. And so you need somebody who understands that industry, understands the cash flow of organic production systems, and that some years are going to be worse than others, and some years are going to be fantastic. In those years of transition, the cash flow may be negative, and we have to be able to live through those negative cash flow years to get to the promised land, right? So talk to your lender early in the process. Bring them along when you come to a conference like this. Invite them to attend a field day, and make sure that they really get a good grasp of what the system is all about. Don't transition too many acres all at once. You know, and I've worked with some folks who've transitioned a lot of acres really quickly, and that tends not to work very well. You've got to kind of understand the system, and so you ease into it a bit. Transition a few acres. You need to maintain cash flow during the transition, and those transitional acres, your cash flow may be negative for a couple of years. It's going to get better, but you still need to maintain operations during the transition time. So don't transition too many acres all at once. Think of transition as a long-term investment. And this is something I've been talking a lot about the last couple of years, and that's learning how to calculate internal rate of return. It's a concept that's a bit foreign in agriculture. It's very common in businesses outside of agriculture. It's just looking at the amount of cash that we have available to put in anything. We've got very little cash. We've got a lot of demands on our cash. We've got a lot of opportunities to deploy that cash. How do we deploy it in a way that gives us the best return on our investment? And when we think about a transition to organic production where you may have negative cash flow for a couple of years, and then you get to positive cash flow, it's like other types of long-term investments. If you're investing in a retirement account, for example, you don't expect to put the money in today and take it back out tomorrow, right? We put the money in today, tomorrow, next year for 5, 10, 15 years, hoping that at some point down the road that money's coming back to us, and it's coming back to us in a lot bigger format than we put it in. And organic transition is the same way. So we look at the years of negative cash flow early on, and then the years of positive cash flow as we get further down the road. To the right here, this is just a little app that I use on my phone. I used to have to calculate this way back. Jim, I'm sure you remember this too. When we were in school, you had to calculate these numbers by hand. You had to find tables of net present values, and you had to go through and you calculate and try to figure out, at least get somewhat close. Now you can plug it into an app and figure it out in 10 seconds. But this is meant to approximate what might happen in an organic transition. So cash flow in year 0, and year 0 is like right now. Year 1 is next year, year 2 is the year after, year 3 is the year after that. So maybe the first year we're amending our soils. And so we may have really negative cash flow that first year where we're putting a lot of soil amendments on. The second year, the third year, our cash flow is negative from our production system. But then when we get to year 4 and year 5 is when we start to get the positive cash flow coming back to us. We can go through a calculation like this, plug the numbers in, and you can see the internal rate of return on this investment, that investment of those really 4 negative years of cash flow to get to 2 positive years of cash flow. The internal rate of return, just rough calculation, is 21%. If we carried this out to year 6, 7, 8, 9, it just gets better and better and better. Now, that's an overly simplified example because we know that in crop rotation, we're not going to get a $600 per acre return every year, right? We're going to have years that, because of the place where we're at in the rotation, we may have a negative cash flow again in certain years on certain acres. And that's where this tool comes in that Jim is working on, because we're not just looking at a per acre per year enterprise budget. We're looking at the entire system on a per year basis and figuring out, is the entire system making money on a year in and year out basis. Finally, keep your variable cost as low as you possibly can during the transitional years. And again, with those cash flows, if we can minimize those negative cash flow years early on, it's going to give us a much better return on the other end. Variable costs, and Jim's going to talk about this as he gets into the tool. Variable costs are the kinds of costs that you don't have if you're not producing anything. It's seed, fertilizer, it's crop or soil amendments and things like that. So if we can keep those costs low, those are the costs that we're actually sitting down writing out a check for each year. If we can keep those costs low during the transition, it's just going to increase the rate of return on the other end. And that leads us into the tool. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to walk you through this great tool that he's developed.